And welcome back. Here's a timeline of the previous video just so you can get a sense of when things are occurring. And of course we wrapped up the last video with Marcus Curtius and the Chasm, and also the plague and the trial of Titus Manlius Imperiosus in the year 362. Sorry, Lucius Manlius, my bad. And his son, of course, was Titus Manlius. Here are some dates that are coming up for this video. You might want to go ahead and write them down. And just go ahead and do that right now. Plus, boom, here are some names and places that'll show up in this video as well. And we'll talk more about Capua, Publius Decius Mus, and Devotio in just a second. Okay, so let's do this. So right after the plague and Marcus Curtius and all that good stuff, in the year 361, Titus Manlius gets a nickname. So Titus Manlius is among those fighting the Gauls. So another Gallic tribe had kind of come down into central Italy and was besieging different towns, just like Brennus and the Senones had done. And the Romans were fighting against the Gauls, and there was a bridge that was separating the two camps. And the Roman commander had given strict instructions that when they were not out on the battlefield fighting against the Gauls, that no Roman was supposed to fight against any Gaul, period. End of story. Punishment of death otherwise. Well, this one huge Gallic soldier, like giant, like 7-foot tall guy, goes into the middle of the bridge and starts taunting the Romans who are in their military camp. And he's calling them all kinds of names, and he even sticks out his tongue at them. And Titus Manlius takes great offense to this, so he goes to the Roman commanding military officer and says, "Would you please, sir, please allow me to go onto the bridge and kick this guy's butt?" And the Roman military officer looks at Titus and is like, "Are you sure, buddy? Because that dude's like 7 feet tall, and you're about 5'4". But if you want, man, go for it. It's your funeral." And so Titus gets permission, and he goes out onto the bridge, and he encounters, I love this drawing because you could just see how like David and Goliath it is, I guess, but look how tall this Gallic soldier is, and it's really hard to tell but in this drawing, but he has a chain around his neck, or a collar or a necklace of some sort, and the Latin word for that is torques, and of course we get torque from that. And it ultimately comes from a verb meaning to twist. And anyway, here he is, Titus Manlius, young and lean, and he just uses his agility and his skill, overpowers, kills the Gallic soldier in front of everybody, and then takes that turquoise, that chain or collar from around his neck. And you can see in this medieval manuscript, for whatever reason, they're all wearing medieval armor in this, but there's the chain that he is taking. And that's how Titus Manlius gets his cognomen, his last name there, of Torquatus, dun, 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 which is pretty awesome. Here's another version of it, a drawing and then a painting. Look at this, his like muscles have muscles, it's ridiculous. And he looks rather old, but he was kind of a young man during all this. So there he is, Titus Manlius Torquatus. And keep him in mind, because when we see him again in just a little bit, he's actually going to be the commanding general himself, like 20 years later. Okay, so we fast forward quite a ways, and what I wanted to do is stop and show you guys this. This is a blow-up map of central Italy, and of course here's Rome, and of course they fought against Veii on the other side of the Tiber River, took possession of that, and so Rome is sort of slowly expanding in this zone right here. You might remember that Rome also defeated the 30 towns of the Latin League, which was kind of around this whole area, going all the way down towards Naples and Mount Vesuvius and Pompeii and whatnot. And they didn't necessarily take control of all of those Latin towns. There was just sort of a broad alliance, I guess, that the Latin League now has with the Romans. Now, the key folks that we're going to focus on right now are right here, the Samnites. They're kind of a hardy, rough mountain folk, and the Apennine Mountains, of course, run as sort of like the backbone of Italy, all down central Italy. The Samnites, this group of people, are sort of expanding at this time. They're expanding southwards into this territory right here that I'm circling, and they start besieging a certain town that's part of the Latin League called Capua, down here, Capua, or Capua, as we would say in English, Capua in Latin. And Capua, the citizens of Capua, of course, felt some kinship to the Romans, especially since they spoke the same language, but absolutely no kinship whatsoever to the Samnites, and here the Samnites are besieging them. So the Capuans sent a delegation to Rome saying, hey, could you please come and help us? This is really bad. I don't know what's going to happen to us. We may not make it. And they offered themselves to be, or they offered to be under Roman authority from that point forward, as long as the Romans would come down with an army and drive the Samnites away. Now, for the Romans, they thought about this for a little while. They weren't sure if they really wanted to go this far south, but then they thought about the benefits of it. This area, if you guys remember from Latin 1, the soil is extremely fertile, due mostly, of course, to Mount Vesuvius and whatnot. So Capua was sort of looked at as being like Italy's own breadbasket. This is, of course, before the Romans conquered Sicily, which was certainly the breadbasket. But for this area of Italy, it was the breadbasket. And so the Romans thought, well, of course, this is a no-brainer. Let's just do this. We'll get the most fertile soil in all of Italy. We're there. So the Romans send down an army. And what do the Romans do? Well, ultimately, they drive the Samnites away from Capua, which was the intended goal. But the Romans, in the process, as they marched down through the territories of the Latin League, made the Latin League so angry with the way that they treated the towns of the Latin League on their journey to Capua that the Romans figured out, oh crap, the Latin League is upset. They might try and fight us. So we need to hurry up and like sign a treaty with the Samnites and refocus our efforts because we may have to end up fighting the Latin League. And that's exactly what happened. So the Samnite War, the first Samnite War, very short, 343 to 341, treaty is signed, Samnites abandon Capua, Capua is now under Roman control, but then there's all this territory in between, which is not under Roman control, and things are sort of coming to a head. Now, what happens? So, the Latin League sends an ambassador to Rome demanding that Rome and the entire Latin League should join together as one huge nation, and that one of the two co-consuls each year should be from the Latin League, and then one, of course, from Rome proper. Now, the Senate actually considers this proposal until none other than Titus Manlius Torquatus himself comes in, gives this big rousing speech, and threatens to kill any Latin leaguer that he sees. He asks Jupiter to help him and to help show the Romans that this is a bad idea and that they should be fighting against the Latin League and not joining forces with them. Now, as the ambassador from the Latin League, he realizes, gosh, I guess this guy Torquatus has changed everybody's minds, and so we're not really going to come to any sort of truce here. As he turns and he leaves the Senate House, there's a massive peal of thunder. And hello, Jupiter has answered the call, right? Massive peal of thunder, and the ambassador trips and falls down the steps. Splat. Splats at the bottom. He's dead. He's broken his neck. And because the ambassador of the Latin League has died while on official diplomatic duty in the enemy city of Rome, what happens? You guessed it, war. 340 to 338, the Romans and the Latin Leaguers fight it out. Now, I have to tell you that the consuls for the important year here of the war, the two co-consuls are none other than Titus Manlius Torquatus and Publius Decius Mus, M-U-S, which, yes, you might recall, stands for mouse. He's the mouse man. Now, I do have to say that the main fighting of all of this occurs down here in this region. In fact, it's very close to Mount Vesuvius, and sometimes it's just simply called the Battle of Mount Vesuvius. So you've got the Latin Leaguers camped out, and the Romans camped out, and the two co-consuls, Torquatus, the two chains, and the mouse man, Mus, have issued a decree that no Roman soldier is supposed to engage in single combat with the enemy. But Titus's own son was taunted from an officer in the Latin League. And so what did Titus do? He challenged him to a duel, and he killed this officer from the Latin League. He was so happy that he did this. he took the officer's armor off of him, took it back to the Roman camp, and threw it at his father, Torquatus's feet, and said, "Hey, look what I did, Dad. This is cool." And what does Titus Manlius Torquatus do? He immediately calls for the lictors, those bodyguards who have the fasces, to seize his son. Then he calls forth all the soldiers together to witness. And he says to all the soldiers, "This soldier, who happens to be my own son, disobeyed my order. He willingly fought against an enemy in single combat, and I strictly forbade that practice from occurring. And so this soldier, my son, must pay the price." And he had his own son executed for failing to comply with his commands right there in front of it. So oddly enough, the thing that Titus did himself, his son dies for, but of course the difference is Titus got permission from his commanding officer, and his son did not. And here he is, clutching his chains, bringing back the memories as he orders his son to be executed. And of course here his son has been executed, and they're holding his son's head up. He can't even look. Horrific. Now, we come to the big battle of Mount Vesuvius, Rome versus the Latin League. The night before the final battle, both of our co-consuls, Torquatus and Mus, the mouse man, by the way, here's Publius Decius Mus, the mouse man, they have the exact same dream. And just bear with me here. Here's the dream. The general of one side and the army of the other side will be defeated the next day in battle. That's the dream that they have. So they wake up in the morning and they huddle together and they both say, "Hey, I had a weird dream." "Oh, you did? Oh, what was that?" "I kind of had one too." And then, "Oh my God, we had the same dream. So what does it mean?" And so here's what they agree. They agree that when the battle starts, if they see, they're going to split their armies up into two. And Torquatus has, of course, half the army. Mus has the other half. And whoever's part of the army is losing, that co-consul will then devote himself and the army of the enemy to the underworld. It's a little confusing, I know. So anyway, the battle starts, and Publius Decius Mus realizes that his part of the army is the one that's struggling, that's getting whooped. And so what does he do? He calls up some of his troops back here, and he gives this really rousing speech, and he offers himself and the army of the Latin League to the spirits of the underworld, and then he gets on his horse. There he is. Boom, boom. Oh, Publius Decius Mus right there. The mouse man gets on his horse and goes running right into the thick of the battle, throws himself right in to the enemies, and he is, of course, killed. But the army of Torquatus is so inspired by this that they kick serious butt. It's a massive victory for Rome that day, and that sacrifice that Publius Decius Mus made in the middle of the battle, sacrificing himself so that his side could win, is called devotio, which is a word, of course, that you already wrote down. So Rome wins this fight, this war against the Latin League. And at this point, Rome becomes, if we go back to the map, the undisputed masters of this entire area, which, despite my colorblindness, I think is kind of reddish, maybe? Anyway, they become the undisputed masters of this. So this is Roman territory in the year 338 BCE. Now you can see that now that they have this whole area, they're butting right up against the Samnites, and you better believe there's going to be some serious issues between the Romans and the Samnites for control of this other part of Italy. Now, how did the Romans, by the way, maintain control over this whole stretch of land? Well, they got really strict. So they wanted to prevent the Latin League from ever forming again. So the Romans banned all the towns of the Latin League from having local assemblies. They couldn't do that anymore. They banned marriage between the towns, and they banned any legal contracts that were drawn up between the towns as well. Some of the towns received full Roman citizenship, others received half Roman citizenship, and others received no Roman citizenship. And that way, none of the towns, at least the Romans felt like, could actually come together and try and take on Rome. So That was the First Samnite War, and then followed immediately by the Latin War. And then, in our next video, we're going to talk about the Second Samnite War, sometimes called the Great Samnite War, which went on for something like 22 straight years. There's some pretty awesome stories coming right up. Okay, bye-bye.